These are 8 tiny caskets lined up side by side. 8 children from the same family whose lives ended before most people even knew their names. No parent ever imagines burying a child, but this community was forced to bury 8.
I looked at my camera and I saw him running away. It was like a ghost in a shadow. It was like, it was weird.
That is a neighbor describing the moment her security camera captured a male figure running across her home. She wasn't watching a stranger run through the neighborhood. She was watching Shamar Elkins, the same man investigators say had just turned his own family home into the scene of an unimaginable tragedy. But what made this case even more disturbing was that Shamar had given everyone a warning. He had told him he would end his wife, end his children, and himself. So why didn't anyone do something? For days, the country struggled to understand how a father could become responsible for such devastation. Then, just months later, it happened again. This time, in a quiet Michigan community. Another family, another father, another group of children whose lives ended in an act that shocked everyone who knew them. The name this time was Christopher Karolkovich, but his story carried a different kind of mystery. Unlike Shamar Elkins, Christopher did not have the same documented history of criminal convictions that would have raised immediate alarms. There was no known public record that suggested the father, husband, and family man people thought they knew would become responsible for such a horrific act. And that is what made the questions surrounding his case so difficult. How does someone with no obvious history of violence reach a moment like this? Before we get to that morning, before the screams of those 8 children, the escape attempt, and officers discovering one of the deadliest family massacres in Louisiana's recent history, let me start you off with the case of Christopher Karolkovich. On the morning of Friday, July 24th, in Grand Haven Township, Michigan, someone noticed smoke. Nothing dramatic, just enough to make them think it was worth a call. However, when officials came out and checked the area, they found nothing and they left.
They were unable to locate an actual house fire, looked around the area and couldn't track it to a specific house.
Think about that for a moment. How ordinary it all seemed. A quiet neighborhood near Lake Michigan, the last week of July, people going about their routines. Someone smells smoke, authorities respond, nothing turns up, and everyone goes back to their day. That's the kind of moment we rarely pay attention to. The small interruptions that feel like nothing at the time. But later, they take on a different weight. Because sometimes what looks like nothing is the first sign of something bigger, and oftentimes dangerous enough to take not just a life, but lives. Because that was what exactly happened in this case. Let me put the timeline in front of you first, so you understand just how crazy this is. At approximately 11:42 that same morning, just before noon, emergency crews were dispatched again to that same street on Riverside Trail in Grand Haven Township. But this time, they found a home on fire. That home belonged to 47-year-old Christopher Karolkovich and his wife, 38-year-old Amanda, known to everyone as Mandy.
I don't make TikToks, especially trendy ones. But I've been watching everybody talk to their plants, and I have some little plants on a trellis. They're not little, they're big.
The couple had 6 children. Christopher worked in executive sales and marketing. To those who knew him professionally, he appeared successful, accomplished, and devoted to providing for his family. This time, from the outside of the home, firefighters could see white smoke coming out from the windows. Neighbors described the smell like an electric wire burning. This kind of gave residents hope that this might simply be a devastating accident. But the moment firefighters forced their way inside, they realized they had stepped into something far more horrifying. Scattered throughout the home were 8 bodies, 2 adults, Christopher and his wife Mandy, then 6 of their children, from age 5 to 15. An entire family had been wiped out from a home that had not once made a police call in all of the years they've been living there. What initially appeared to be a tragic fire scene quickly transformed into one of the most disturbing crime investigations Michigan had seen in years. Because here's the thing that makes the motive in this case so much harder to pin down than usual. In most investigations, there's a trail. You see the warning signs like a police call to the house, restraining orders, maybe a complaint, or even charges, a pattern of escalation that, once you know how it ends, reads like a series of missed exits. But here, there was nothing. Senior Captain Jake Sparks with the Ottawa County Sheriff's Office confirmed deputies had never been called to that home, and Christopher had no criminal history at all. On paper, this family looked exactly like what they projected: stable, safe, ordinary. And this is what makes it so unsettling. Because if a family like this, a man with a respected job title, a wife admired in the school district, 6 children, a house on a quiet road, can end in tragedy without any visible cracks, then what does that say about the neighborhoods we think of as safe? By Monday afternoon, the silence finally broke. The Ottawa County Sheriff's Office and Captain Jake Sparks stood before the cameras and confirmed what the community had been bracing itself to hear.
And at that time, numerous decedents were found inside the home, and sheriff's detectives began an investigation at that time.
It was Christopher. He was the one who pulled the trigger, killing his wife Amanda, their 6 children, before turning the gun on himself. The gun wasn't stolen. It was a registered handgun, legally owned, and Sparks made it clear Christopher was the only person who fired it. Meanwhile, fire investigators reached another disturbing conclusion. The fire had not started accidentally. According to Captain Jake Sparks, also shared that the fire had been intentionally set in several different locations throughout the house.
There were various different spots lit throughout the residence, both the first floor and the basement floor.
It appeared that after the shootings, someone had walked through the home deliberately igniting separate fires before everything was left to burn. Authorities believe the violence may have begun sometime during the night before it was discovered, though investigators have not established an exact timeline, because the only surviving witness to what happened was gone. That detail carried a heavy weight, because it erased any lingering questions about outside involvement or chance. No intruder, no accident, no one else to blame. Just one man, one weapon, and 8 lives, taken in a single act. But the truth didn't close the case. It opened a bigger one, because behind those deaths was something deeper, something that pointed to a shift in Christopher Kolkich's life. A change that had taken place weeks before, and one that would cast a shadow over everything that followed. How does a family that looks so full of love end up dying together inside their own home? To really understand why this case feels so unsettling, you have to rewind to 2008. Christopher and Mandy seemed to be a couple that had it all together. They had first met while working at a beverage company in 2008. They started dating that summer, a detail Mandy herself once shared on a parenting blog she kept for years. She wrote about family life, milestones, and everyday routines until 2016, when she stopped updating the blog and shifted her presence over to TikTok. Chris was older, had been married before, but together they built what looked like the kind of life people dream about. 4 biological children, 2 daughters adopted from China, a $750,000 home tucked away on a quiet road. Mandy was described by family and friends as a kind and incredible wife, an exceptional mother, and someone whose kindness touched everyone she met. She loved to document family adventures, small milestone celebration, and made ordinary moments feel special. She worked as a substitute teacher in Grand Haven area public schools. She loved styling hair and poured nearly every ounce of her energy into raising her children. Together, she and Christopher were raising 6 children between the ages of 5 and 15. 4 of those children were their biological children, while 2 had been adopted from China, a decision that reflected the family's willingness to open their hearts far beyond themselves. However, here's the wild part nobody saw coming, something that may explain the reasons behind the gruesome murders. The public discovered something Mandy had quietly shared long before the tragedy, not with reporters, not with the police, but anonymously, online. Weeks before the murders, Amanda herself had gone online, on Reddit, and posted about her husband cheating with an intern. The Reddit account, which went by the name Mandike1179, is widely believed to belong to Amanda Karolkovitz. It lines up with her life, timeline, and marriage. Over the span of about 2 years, she posted dozens of times, opening up about her struggles in ways she never did publicly. Like many who turned to Reddit, Amanda used the platform to speak anonymously, to weigh impossible decisions, and to crowdsource advice from strangers. Her posts weren't casual updates. They were raw confessions about betrayal, fear, and the fight to hold her family together. About 6 years before the murders, Amanda wrote that Christopher had what he called an emotional affair with a much younger intern at his office. He even described her life in Grand Haven as like living in a Hallmark. But she also admitted that beneath the surface, her marriage was hitting the shores. She also posted, implying that when she and Christopher met, she was an intern, and he had cheated on his partner with her, and now the same thing was happening. He was divorced and older than me. Fast forward 10 years and 5 kids, he was cheating with the intern again, the same age I was when I was the intern, she wrote. After about a year of self-loathing, I remember crying and looking at myself in the mirror and realizing how it was that I was the one who was living so miserably because of what he did. I finally realized that I had been the only person who has ever showed up for myself my whole entire life. The betrayal left her devastated. She described feeling as though she wasn't enough. As a mother raising 5 young children at the time, she blamed herself for changes in her appearance and struggled with crushing self-doubt. She wrote about crying in front of the mirror, realizing she was the one living miserably because of his choices. Christopher insisted the affair never turned physical. Amanda never believed him. The evidence, she said, made that claim very unlikely. Their marriage became a cycle of therapy sessions, anger, and defensiveness. She even admitted to shoving him once, saying it felt like fight or flight against someone who towered over her and had destroyed her mentally. Amanda admitted that she wanted out of the marriage, but the thought of leaving Christopher terrified her. She described it as insanely terrifying, the kind of decision that felt impossible when 6 children were depending on her. For months, she had questioned her own worth. But eventually, something changed. So instead of walking away, she chose to stay. She decided to work through the problems, even if it meant faking happiness for the sake of her kids. In her own words, she kept reminding herself, "I love my kids more than I hate my husband right now." Instead of trying to become the woman she thought her husband wanted, Mandy began focusing on becoming someone she could be proud of. She filled journals with positive affirmations. She embraced her natural appearance. She stopped trying to earn someone else's approval and began rebuilding her confidence from within. In one of her posts, she reflected that her newfound self-confidence seemed to make her husband appreciate her more, but more importantly, it reminded her that she deserved better than betrayal. Over time, they decided to try and rebuild their marriage. They had gone for counseling, sobriety, and even had lifestyle changes. Amanda wrote that she was happy, in some ways, but still didn't feel safe emotionally. Christopher's defensiveness never went away, and she doubted whether progress was real. To anyone reading those posts at the time, they looked like the honest reflections of someone navigating one of marriage's hardest challenges. Nothing in them foreshadowed the unimaginable tragedy that investigators now say unfolded inside their home. And despite everything that has since come to light, one question still remains unanswered. If their marriage had survived infidelity, what happened next that ended with an entire family losing their lives? That is the question investigators continue trying to answer. As of this moment, police still haven't released an official motive for why Christopher did what he did, as the investigation is too new. But Amanda's Reddit account, Mandike1179, may offer clues. In one post, she hinted that Christopher wasn't just a husband accused of cheating. He also had a pattern of instability, describing him as a man who lied about his work history, exaggerated his education, and kept getting fired from jobs. Christopher's had served as the National Vice President of Sales and Marketing for the American Heart Association. But as investigators dug deeper, another development came to light. The organization confirmed that Christopher was no longer employed there. His employment had ended earlier that month. Exactly why his employment ended has never been publicly disclosed. Those details matter, because when you put them alongside the affair allegations and the cracks in their marriage, you start to see a bigger picture. A man whose public image of success was collapsing, and who may have been desperate to control the narrative at any cost. And when men like this, men who see their families as extensions of themselves, as status symbols, feel that image collapsing, some lash out in the most destructive way possible. Christopher's world was crumbling, and instead of facing it, he chose to destroy the very people closest to him. On July 16th, just weeks before the tragedy, Mandy had taken their adopted daughters back to China, a trip she happily shared through photos and videos online. In one post, she wore traditional Hanfu clothing, her hair neatly styled, makeup done, standing proudly with her two daughters, Ella and Caroline. She called it an awesome experience with my precious daughters, writing about how proud they all were of the girls' Chinese heritage. Her feed was filled with clips from the trip, little snapshots of moments she wanted to hold on to. It was the kind of thing mothers do when they're living a chapter they know they'll want to remember. There are beach trips, summer bucket lists, family outings, and laughter. Nothing about those videos suggests a family standing on the edge of catastrophe. Ordinary posts, joyful updates, pieces of a story that felt safe at the time, but would later carry a weight no one could have imagined. In 2019, just before their 10th anniversary, Chris posted on Facebook. He wrote that he was a very lucky guy. It was the kind of post that seemed simple, even sweet, a husband reflecting on the life he had built. But 7 years later, that same man would take the lives of the very family he once called his greatest blessing. And that's what makes this story so hard to process. The gap between the image they projected and the reality that unfolded. Looking through her social media today feels almost surreal, because if there were storms brewing behind closed doors, very few people seemed to know. Looking from the outside, the Karolkiewicz family looked like they were living the kind of life many people aspire to have. That was until that Friday afternoon when everything ended horrifyingly. Captain Jake Sparks didn't sugarcoat the situation. He admitted right away that investigators still don't have the full picture. The timeline isn't clear, and there are unanswered questions about what led up to the tragedy. What they do know, he said, is that this case will be remembered as an unspeakable tragedy, one they may never fully understand. Still, he promised they would do everything possible to find answers and honor the victims.
This is an unspeakable tragedy that we may never completely understand why it happened, but we'll do our best to find the answers and to honor the memory of those victims.
But here's what stood out most: the silence. There was no suicide note, no explanation, no final words left behind for family, friends, or investigators. Nothing to help make sense of why it happened. That absence is chilling, because it leaves everyone searching for meaning in a void. And yet, Jake hinted at something else. When investigators combed through the house, they seized a large amount of documentation. He didn't say what it was, only that it would take time to process. Was it financial records, personal letters, digital devices? Nobody outside the investigation knows. All the public saw was investigators carrying out boxes of material, enough that Jake himself flagged it as a major undertaking. That detail matters, because whatever explanation this case eventually produces, if it produces one at all, could be sitting in that pile right now. Somewhere in those documents may be the missing piece, the motive, the trigger, the reason behind a crime that otherwise feels impossible to comprehend. But when a tragedy happens inside a family, one of the hardest questions for investigators and the public to answer is not just why did this happen? Was there anything that came before it? In the case of Christopher Karolkiewicz, that question became part of the search for answers. From everything known publicly, there was no criminal history warning people around him of what was coming, no pattern of violence that made the final outcome easy to predict. But the next case tells a very different story, because when investigators began looking into Shamar Elkins, they were not starting with a blank page. Long before his name became connected to one of the most devastating family annihilation cases in recent memory, Shamar already had a history that raised concerns. There were previous encounters with the justice system, past allegations, and moments that showed a troubling pattern long before the final act that shocked an entire community. And that is what makes his case so difficult to process. Because sometimes the warning signs are hidden so deeply that nobody knows where to look. But other times, the warning signs are already there, remembered by people who witnessed them, and documented long before the moment when everything falls apart. 3 years before the massacre, Shamar's own mother said he had openly described exactly how it would happen. Not in vague terms, not as a passing joke. If his wife ever left him, he would end her, end the children, and then end himself. Those words never reached the police. They were never written into a report, never entered into a database. Instead, they remained locked inside the family, until 8 children would suffer the aftermath. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the very beginning. Christina Snow lived on Harrison Street in Cedar Grove with her 3 children, 5-year-old Brelan, 6-year-old Kadarian, and 11-year-old Soraya. Only a block away, on West 79th Street, lived Shamar Elkins, the father of Christiana's 3 children. He shared that home with his wife, Shaniqua Pugh, and their 4 daughters, 3-year-old Jayla, 5-year-old Shayla, 6-year-old Kayla, and 7-year-old Layla. Also living in the house were Shaniqua's sister, Kosha Pugh, her husband Troy Brown, and their 2 children, 10-year-old Markaden and 12-year-old Makiana. It was a house that rarely stayed quiet. Children filled every room. There was constant laughter. Arguments over toys, birthday parties, school mornings. The kind of home where chaos usually meant children simply being children. Later, Troy Brown would tell reporters that the house was always alive, always full of movement, always full of love. No one imagined that, in a matter of hours, it would become one of the largest crime scenes the city had ever seen. Although the 2 households were separate, they remained connected through Shamar Elkins. He shared 3 children with Christina Snow, while also being married to Shaniqua Pugh. However, by early 2026, that marriage had reached its breaking point. According to family members, there was an issue of infidelity that had destroyed whatever trust remained in the Shane. Shaniqua had decided to file for a divorce, and after months of tension, the legal process was finally moving forward. The court appearance was scheduled for Monday, April 20th. Just one day after, Shamar decided to take down all the members of his family. Family members later told reporters that Shaniqua had been asking questions about properly filing for divorce. She wanted to move on. One cousin told the media that while there had been frequent arguments between the couple, Christiana had never mentioned physical violence before that Sunday. Instead, the conflict appeared centered around the failing marriage and Elkin's refusal to accept that it was ending.
So I know that there was some infidelity she didn't necessarily express it to me, but I do know that she came to me and she asked me about helping her properly file for divorce. And to my understanding, prior to this incident, they were scheduled to go to court on Monday.
On April 10th, just 9 days before the attack, Shaniqua had reposted a message on social media that now gives you the chilling feeling thinking about it in hindsight. For the first time in my life, I don't want to be anybody's woman or wife. I'm choosing me, my peace, and my freedom. She had captioned it with only 3 words. This is the one. Meaning this post explained exactly how she had been feeling, what she wanted for herself, and how much she wanted things to change. At the time, it seemed like a woman finally reclaiming her life. Now, many see it as the final chapter before tragedy. But let me take you back a bit, because this is where this story leaves you with a list of unanswered questions. According to one family member, the warning signs stretched back much further, 3 years earlier. In 2023, Betty Walker, the woman who helped raise Shamar Elkins, later spoke with the New York Times about conversations she remembered vividly. She said that when Shaniqua first talked about leaving the relationship and taking the children, Sharma had responded with a chilling threat. If she left, he would take her life, he would take the children, and then he would take his own life. It's difficult to hear those words now without wondering what might have happened if someone outside the family had known. According to Betty, when Shaniqua had brought it up again later, Sharma dismissed it. He claimed he had only been joking about the threat. Whether anyone truly believed or not is impossible to know. But what is known is this: those threats never reached law enforcement. There was no police report made, no restraining order filed, no documented complaint. Nothing that would have alerted any agency that such a threat had allegedly been made. For 3 years, those words existed only inside the family, invisible to every system designed to identify people at risk. This is where I keep coming back to how dangerous the moment of separation can be in abusive relationships. Researchers who study intimate partner violence have found again and again that when an abuser makes explicit threats during separation, it's one of the strongest warning signs that things could turn deadly. While not every threat becomes action, far from it, but experts consistently identify separation, or the threat of separation, as one of the highest risk periods in chaotic relationships. At a press conference following the shootings, Shreveport Police Chief Wayne Smith hinted that investigators believed there had likely been previous problems inside the relationship. He told reporters,
"The chances are good that this was not the first time."
But because no prior incidents had been officially reported, investigators had little historical documentation to work with. Whatever had happened inside that relationship largely stayed there, and that silence would later become one of the biggest questions surrounding the case. To people who knew him, Shamar Elkins appeared to be living a fairly ordinary life. He worked for UPS, providing for his family like so many others in the community. One former coworker, Willie Vasher, later told the New York Times that their families knew each other well. Their children had grown up together, and from his interaction with Shamar, there wasn't anything that immediately made him stand out, except that he often seemed weighed down by stress. Before working at UPS, Shamar had also spent several years serving in the Louisiana Army National Guard. He was enlisted in 2013, where he trained as both a signal support systems specialist and a fire support specialist. His military service ended in 2020, and according to Army records, he never deployed overseas. But there were also parts of his past that painted a more complicated picture. Unlike Christopher Karalkovitz, who had no criminal records, court records show that Shamar was no new face when it came to committing crimes. He had previous run-ins with the law years before the deadly events of 2026. In 2016, he was convicted of driving while intoxicated. 3 years later, in 2019, he was convicted on an illegal weapons charge. Taken on their own, those incidents didn't predict the tragedy that would later unfold. In February 2026, just 2 months before the massacre, Shamar Elkins had voluntarily admitted himself into the Veterans Affairs Hospital in Shreveport. According to Betty Walker, the hospitalization followed what the family described as an attempt of one taking one's life. He had reportedly remained there for approximately 10 days before being discharged by the Veterans Affairs Hospital. Now I want you to understand this part. Shamar wasn't discharged and sent to a different living condition. No, he was back to the same household, the same financial responsibility and pressure of 2 homes. The marriage was still ending. The divorce was still going to happen. When he returned home, family members noticed he wasn't quite the same. He was even asked if he thought he needed to go back to the hospital, but Shamar answered simply that he's fine and was going to deal with it. Whether he truly believed that, no one knows. But less than 2 weeks later, he posted something on Facebook. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't angry. It was a prayer. "Dear God, today I ask you to help me guard my mind and my emotions. When negativity arises, remind me to say it does not belong to me." Reading those words today, knowing what happened only weeks later, it's impossible not to wonder what internal battle he was fighting. Then came another conversation that now carries heartbreaking significance. On Easter Sunday, April 5th, Shamar had called his mother and stepfather in Oklahoma. According to his stepfather, Marcus Jackson, Shamar was crying. He spoke about the divorce. He talked about feeling overwhelmed and having dark thoughts. But, before ending the call, he said something his stepfather would never forget. Some people don't come back from their demons. At the time, it sounded like someone struggling emotionally. His family tried to comfort him. The call ended. No welfare check followed, no emergency intervention. Not because anyone ignored him, but because most conversations like that never end in mass murder. Families hear frightening things during painful divorces. People experiencing depression often express hopelessness without ever hurting anyone. Looking back, it's easy to connect the dots. Living through those moments in real time is much harder. Even now, one question surrounding that hospitalization remains unanswered publicly. Investigators have never said whether doctors at the Veterans Affairs Hospital performed a formal lethality assessment before Elkins was discharged. It's also not known whether medical staff considered his pending divorce a significant risk factor, or whether his criminal history including a prior felony conviction that legally prohibited him from possessing firearms, was factored into any discharge planning. Those details have never been released publicly, but one fact investigators did uncover would become impossible to ignore. Despite a prior conviction that legally prohibited him from possessing firearms until at least 2029, investigators say Shamar Elkins had access to not just one, but 2 guns. I want you to think about that for a moment. How did a man who wasn't supposed to have a firearm end up with not just 1, but 2 firearms? And more importantly, what happened after he picked them up? The timeline they released paints a devastating picture. According to authorities, in April 19, sometime around 5 o'clock that Sunday morning, Sharma had gone first to Christina Snow's home on Harrison Street. There was no indication that Christina was expecting him. Family members later said she had absolutely no warning. What happened inside that house unfolded in minutes. Christina was shot multiple times. Despite suffering what relatives described as life-threatening injuries, she somehow managed to call for help. But she didn't dial 911 herself. She was unable to do so physically, so she used Siri on her phone to contact emergency services. That single act likely saved her life. But by then, Shamar Elkins had already taken their 3 children from the house. Investigators say he drove only 1 block away, to West 79th Street. The home where his estranged wife, Shaniqua, lived with their daughters and other relatives. At 5:55 a.m., Shreveport police received the first emergency call from the home. Within moments, dispatchers realized they weren't dealing with an ordinary domestic disturbance. Officers immediately flooded the area. Police Chief Wayne Smith later described it as one of the most challenging incidents the department had ever faced. As officers rushed toward the neighborhood, dispatchers began receiving different other calls. At 5:59 a.m., Shamar Elkins had already been identified by name. At that time, reports indicated that everyone inside the West 79th Street house had been shot. However, just 2 minutes later, at approximately 6 a.m., the first officers arrived. Then another emergency call came in, this one from Harrison Street. A woman had been shot and her children had been taken. At around 6:10 a.m., dispatch officially connected both crime scenes into one unfolding incident. Police now understood they were searching for the same suspect. Meanwhile, inside the West 79th Street home, survival had become a matter of seconds. One of the children, a 12-year-old girl, had managed to escape by climbing onto the roof of the house. Authorities later confirmed she survived after jumping to safety. She would tragically become the only child that made it out alive. Others tried desperately to escape as well. Investigators later found evidence near the back door, showing several children had attempted to flee the home. Sadly, they never made it outside. By 6:43 a.m., officers had cleared the residence. Inside the home were 7 children. Outside was only 1 survivor on the roof. The neighborhood had become a scene almost impossible to comprehend. While officers worked those 2 locations, a third emergency was happening. Shamar Elkins had fled the neighborhood after the shootings. During his escape, investigators alleged that he had carjacked another vehicle before leading law enforcement on a pursuit into neighboring Bossier City. The chase came to an end after a confrontation with police. At approximately 7:30 that morning, Shamar Elkins was pronounced dead. Exactly how he died remains under investigation. Louisiana State Police have not publicly determined whether he died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, police gunfire, or some combination of both. Because of that, officials have repeatedly declined to speculate while the investigation remains active. The discovery that Shamar had been in possession of guns shifted investigators beyond simply examining the murders themselves. Now they also had to determine how someone legally prohibited from owning firearms managed to arm himself. On April 21, federal prosecutors announced the arrest of 56-year-old Charles Ford. According to court documents, Charles was himself a convicted felon. Federal investigators traced one of the firearms used in the shooting back to its original legal purchaser. She reportedly told investigators she had given the weapon to Charles years earlier. Court documents allege that Charles eventually realized Shamar Elkins had taken the firearm. When Charles had confronted him, investigators say Shamar became aggressive. Charles allegedly decided not to push the issue any further. That decision would later become part of a federal criminal case. U.S. Attorney Zachary Keller explained that although Shamar would never stand trial because he died after the shootings, but holding those accountable who had illegally allowed firearms to circulate could provide at least some measure of justice for the victims' families. The case was no longer just about one man's actions. It was becoming a broader investigation into how multiple failures may have intersected, and federal investigators weren't finished. As detectives continued tracing Shamar Elkins' movements during his final hours, another name surfaced, someone Shamar had known for nearly 25 years. And investigators would soon accuse that man of violating federal gun laws as well. According to federal authorities, Shamar had driven to the home of a longtime acquaintance named Michael Mayance during the final moments of the horrifying situation he had created. Michael and Shamar had reportedly known each other for approximately 25 years. In the days that followed, federal prosecutors charged Michael Mayance with illegally possessing a firearm. Court records allege that at the time, Michael Mayance was under an active domestic violence protective order, a legal restriction that, just like Shamar and Charles, prohibited him from owning or possessing firearms. That meant 3 different people connected to this case were now tied to illegal gun possession: Shamar Elkins, Charles Ford, and Michael Mayance. Each case would become part of separate federal investigations running alongside the homicide investigation itself. With Sharma Elkins dead, there would be no trial, no opportunity for investigators to ask him why, and no definitive explanation that could ever account for what had happened. Instead, the focus shifted entirely to those left behind, to the survivors, and to the children whose lives ended before most of the city had even finished waking up. In the aftermath, investigators publicly identified each of the young victims. Among the children whose lives were taken that morning were 3-year-old Jayla Elkins and 5-year-old Shayla Elkins. Also lost were 5-year-old Breland Snow, 6-year-old Kadarian Snow, 6-year-old Layla Pugh, 7-year-old Marcaden Pugh, and 11-year-old Soraya Snow. The tragedy also claimed the life of 6-year-old Kayla Pugh, the daughter of Shaniqua Pugh's sister, Kosha Pugh, and her husband, Troy Brown. "I'm never going to get to throw the football with him again. I'm never going to get to hear him say, 'Daddy, can I get this bag of chips?'" They were children who should have been worrying about school, cartoons, birthdays, and the simple things that make up a childhood. Family members shared that Soraya dreamed of opening a homeless shelter one day. Her younger brothers, Brelan and Kadarian, hoped to grow up and become community leaders. Those dreams ended before sunrise on April 19th. What was more chilling was on Saturday evening, April 18th, just a day before the tragic event, Shamar had posted on Facebook that he had taken his eldest daughter Soraya out on a date, just the 2 of them. Shaniqua had even reposted it with the caption, "That's what's wrong with her now. He spoils her. As long as she's happy, I'm happy." Little did she know that would be the last time she was going to see her children. For the people living in that neighborhood, the Elkins family home was not a place that raised suspicion. It was just another house on a familiar street, surrounded by neighbors who had watched the children grow up and seen the family going about their daily lives. Fred Montgomery, who lived directly across the street, said there was nothing that suggested something like this was coming. Just the evening before the tragedy, Fred saw Shamar sitting outside on the porch. It was an ordinary moment between neighbors. He waved, Shamar waved back, and life seemed completely normal. Then, by the next morning, that same neighborhood woke up to a scene nobody could have imagined.
Just yesterday evening, he was sitting on the porch, and I waved at him, he waved back. The children were in the yard playing, and I just come in the house, and then this morning, we woke up to all of this.
And for the families left behind, the pain carried another heartbreaking layer. According to their uncle, Lionel Pugh, who had also lost a child in the shooting, shared that nearly 20 years earlier, in the very same month of April, sisters Shaniqua and Kosha had lost their own mother to gun violence in Shreveport. Now, 2 decades later, they were burying their children for the same reason. A tragedy their family thought they had survived had returned in almost unimaginable fashion. In the days that followed the tragedy, the community of Shreveport came together to remember the 8 children whose lives were taken far too soon. At the vigil, Families, friends, classmates, and strangers gathered with candles in their hands, trying to honor children who should have had many more years ahead of them. Their names were spoken, their memories were shared, and the community mourned not just the lives they lost, but the futures that would never come. The grief became even heavier during their funeral, where 8 children were laid to rest. What should have been moments filled with celebrations of birthdays, school achievements, and childhood memories became a heartbreaking goodbye. Loved ones remembered each child as an individual, not just as victims of a tragedy. They spoke about their personalities, their smiles, and the little things that made them special to the people who loved them. For many in Shreveport, the funeral was a moment that made the reality of the loss impossible to ignore. 8 young lives are gone. 8 families forever changed. 2 families, 2 fathers, 2 tragedies that looked impossible from the outside. Where do you think the responsibility begins when someone shows signs that they may become a danger to the people closest to them?
I cannot fathom why some animal would do that to a child.
Who wants to bury their child? It should be the other way around.
Because I love that little girl, okay? I'll never be the same again. Help us, Father. We need you, Jesus.
On the night of June 13, 2022, a 9-year-old child was executed by his mother's ex-boyfriend. When the authorities dug deeper to find the motive, they uncovered something even more disturbing. Something that should have never been allowed to happen. This is the devastating story of Kylie Sorrells in the hands of her mother's vengeful 22-year-old ex-boyfriend. This story takes us all the way to Houston, Texas, a city that is struggling with a significantly high crime rate. In this city, where crime remains an ongoing battle, it's a reflection that will be displayed in the tragedy that will fall on the child Kylie. Kylie Sorrells was born in Houston, Texas on July 10, 2013, to Brittany Sorrells and her ex-husband, whose name is not known to the public. Brittany was known to be a caring and protective mother. She was the one who financially provided for her 3 children, in hopes of giving them a better life. Kylie was the eldest child of Brittany's 3 daughters. Just like what her mother had promised them, Kylie grew up in a home filled with love and laughter alongside her younger sisters, aged 7 and 1, and together they lived peacefully in an apartment complex in Houston, together with a cousin of Brittany. Kylie grew up a bright kid, so Brittany never had a problem with her. Just like any firstborn, she was a strong-willed and reliable kid. She attended Windsor Village Elementary School, where she was known for her infectious smile and boundless energy. Outside her studies, Kylie was a rising basketball star with dreams of success, a passion her mother wholeheartedly supported.
Good boys. That's our number 6. How'd y'all do, Kylie? Huh? She's tired. I'm tired too. Look.
Off the court, she loved making TikTok videos, dancing, and spending time with family. Kylie was also involved in many social activities just like any other kid. With a life full of possibilities ahead of her, she was happy with her family. But their beautiful family would be disrupted when Brittany, her mother, meets a new young man, 22-year-old, named Jeremiah Jones. For a while, Jeremiah Jones became a significant part of their family's lives. But there was one problem. Jeremiah hides a dark past, one that would foreshadow the tragedy that he will inflict on Brittany's innocent family. Jeremiah was known in the Houston area as a gang member with a long rap sheet of criminal convictions. Starting from when he was 12 years old, he was able to establish a notorious reputation. His convictions ranged from burglary, evading arrest, to making terrorist threats. He was a repeat offender with a criminal history that should have kept him behind bars all this time. Yet time after time, he was able to get away from his crimes through bonds that allowed him to walk free. Matter of fact, he was facing 5 bonds all at the same time, which highlights how the criminal justice system fails. And this failure would lead to the worst tragedy in Brittany's family. Despite his chaotic past, Brittany chose to accept his flaws and continued her relationship with Jones. And eventually, he started to live with them. He helped in providing for the family's needs. He was allowed to interact with Brittany's children, including Kylie. And for a while, things seemed to work, and Brittany seemed to have a good family. They even thought of getting married to each other one day, but it was not to be. During the course of their relationship, Brittany and Jones were very toxic. The couple would always be found arguing over trivial things. At first, it was just small fights, but later on, the quarrels became more aggressive and sometimes ended up in abusive behavior. And it doesn't end there. Jones constantly cheats on Brittany, and when he is caught, he denies everything. This toxicity between them eventually became too much for Brittany to handle and was slowly becoming a threat to her children's lives as well. Brittany wanted to get away from Jones's mischief and overly toxic demeanor. She believed that staying long in a relationship would eventually cause harm to herself and her family, and she was definitely right about it, and so made a decision that changed everything. After 8 months of dating, Brittany finally decided to break up with him, but Jones was too obsessed with Brittany to let her go, and so he couldn't accept the breakup and begged for Brittany to take him back. But Brittany was set on her decision to leave him. This was when Jones started to become more violent and threatened to kill her and her children if she didn't take him back. So, she decided to file a restraining order. This, however, will not be enough to protect them from the looming tragedy that is about to happen. Even with the restraining order in place, Jones continued to make threats and refused to stay away. He was determined to convince Brittany to take him back. And as the days passed, Jones was starting to think that the reason for the breakup had nothing to do with Brittany wanting safety and security for her family. He believed that she was seeing another man. And this idea drove Jeremiah Jones to borderline jealousy, and it wasn't long until the police were forced to intervene over and over again. At least 4 times within just a few weeks, officers were called to Brittany's home because of Jones's relentless harassment. Each time, he found a way to push the boundaries, testing how far he could go before facing real consequences. Despite the struggle and danger in her mother's relationship with Jones, Kylie remained a resilient child destined to have a bright future ahead of her. She became Brittany's strength during these trying times in their family. But everything changed when Jones decided to visit them again. On June 13, 2022, Jones arrived at Brittany's home with a sinister goal in his mind: to force her to take him back. And if she refused, he would make good on his terrifying threat, and that is to hurt her and the children. As he arrived at the home, he barged into the family's bedroom. Brittany and her 3 daughters were all cuddled in bed, watching their favorite television show. It was just an ordinary night for the family. No one had ever thought that the night would end in bloodshed and death. She was confident with the comfort of knowing her children were safe beside her. But what comes next may shock you as much as it shocked Brittany. The moment Jones entered the room, he immediately yanked the television from the wall and violently snapped all the cords attached to it as he aggressively ripped it away. He claimed that the TV belonged to him. This was the start of their nightmare. Jones's aggressive actions started to become disturbing. His actions made Brittany and her children huddled in fear. Jones was consumed by jealousy and rage. Tension filled the room as the two argued in frustration. As their argument was escalating, Brittany decided to leave the bedroom, fearing the commotion near her children might put them in danger. Still, his obsession with control was far from over. Jones continued to accuse Brittany of cheating on him and of moving on with another man. Despite Brittany's countless denials, Jones was certain that she was having an affair. He demanded her phone because he was convinced that it held proof of her disloyalty, but one act of fear would set off a chain of devastation. Brittany handed her phone. She was trembling. Jones was suspicious about this, and he quickly snatched the phone from her. Then, seconds after that, the horrifying climax of that evening happened. Jones went inside the children's bedroom and turned his gun on Kylie, fired 2 shots, and one on the innocent girl's head. Just like that, with an easy pull of the trigger, Jones shot his daughter, ending her life in an instant. Brittany was shocked to hear the gunshots. She saw her eldest daughter's wounded body fall into the bed, almost lifeless. But Jones wasn't done. Just as Brittany was about to rescue her daughter from the incident and the horrors that fell on her, Jones went back to the living and forced Brittany to her knees, then turned the gun on her and pulled the trigger, and the bullet hit her shoulder and she fell to the ground. In a matter of seconds, Jones was gone. Without hesitation and any ounce of conscience, he fled the crime scene as if he hadn't done anything evil. He jumped into a Chevy Camaro and ran away, leaving behind a bleeding mother and 1 child in critical danger. Brittany immediately went to her daughter, despite the pain she was enduring on her shoulder. And what she found was a scene that no mother would be prepared for. She found her daughter clinging to life. This was when she called 911 to report the tragedy.
Tragedy at this Houston Heights apartment complex. Houston police say it's where 9-year-old Kylie Sorrells died after she was intentionally shot and killed by Jeremiah Jones, her mom Brittany Sorrell's ex-boyfriend. Police believe the motive appears to be revenge. They say Jones was upset about a recent breakup with Kylie's mother. He showed up at the apartment and confronted her as she watched a movie with her 3 daughters. The argument escalated. At one point, Jones even ripped a TV off the wall. Jones accused Sorrells of cheating. Police say he ultimately went back to the bedroom and shot Kylie in the head, execution style. Before leaving the apartment, investigators tell us he shot Brittany too in the shoulder. She was rushed to the hospital and is expected to survive. Tonight's arrest happening 18 miles from the murder scene off Imperial Valley Drive. That's where SWAT moved in to make the arrest at 6 this evening. He's now charged with capital murder and aggravated assault. Jones has a lengthy criminal record, and tonight we're learning he was out on 5 different bonds for 5 different offenses, released from jail just 2 weeks ago on June 1st.
When the police arrived, what they witnessed was the crime scene that was left by Jones and Brittany, who was bleeding, gasping, trying to speak through the agony. Despite the gunshot she had, Brittany rushed Kylie to the hospital. As for Brittany, her condition was not critical and she was treated with the necessary medical intervention immediately. But unfortunately, Kylie did not make it alive. The sweet 9-year-old child suffered a bitter ending, all for revenge that had nothing to do with her. And the weight of that loss will haunt everyone who loved her. Meanwhile, the police and other authorities began to move forward with the case at the crime scene. The place was in chaos. The bed was full of splattered blood, a broken TV, and overturned furniture. Evidence was collected, photos were taken, but no amount of documentation could capture the true weight of what had happened here. The police believed that this case wasn't just about that night. It was about everything leading up to it, every red flag, every warning sign that was ignored, and every chance to prevent this tragedy that was wasted.
Growing over the senseless shooting of a 9-year-old girl. And tonight, court records show prosecutors tried to keep the accused locked up, but a judge granted bond. ABC 13 reporter Shelley Childers live now to explain more for us. Shelley?
Gina, the Houston Police Department calls 9-year-old Kylie Sorrells one of their own. She was a member of the Greater Houston Police Activities League, and now the police union is speaking out, angered that the accused killer was able to rack up case after case and was still granted bond after bond after bond. In fact, allegedly shooting this little girl in the head less than 2 weeks after his most recent jail stint. Kylie Sorrells shot and killed at just 9 years old inside her mother's apartment Monday night.
I cannot fathom why some animal would do that to a child.
Doug Griffith with the Houston Police Officers Union not mincing words for Jeremiah Jones. The 22-year-old accused killer also shot and injured Kylie's mother, his ex-girlfriend. Court records show he had just bonded out of jail June 1st for charges of evading police, making a terroristic threat, and violating a protective order. Prosecutors requested bond be denied, but a judge granting bonds totaling $45,000. Jones was already out on bond for felon in possession of a firearm and burglary of a habitation when he was granted these 3 new bonds June 1st. Griffith believes the Harris County court system failed this 9-year-old innocent child who loved playing for the Police Activities League.
At this time, Jeremiah Jones' name was already identified to be the primary suspect of the murder of the innocent Kylie. And as the news spread about this horrifying tragedy, the manhunt for Jones was already underway, hoping to finally put him behind bars. But as the authorities came closing in, Jones did something unexpected. On the morning of June 14, 2022, in a shocking turn of events, Jones resurfaced not in custody, but on a news exclusive, speaking through a Zoom call to deny everything.
Jeremiah, let me ask you, did you shoot your ex and her 9-year-old daughter?
No, ma'am.
As a manhunt is underway for 22-year-old Jeremiah Jones, he spoke with me on Zoom, telling me he wasn't there at his ex-girlfriend's apartment and saying he did not do it. But why would his ex-girlfriend tell police he's the one who opened fire on her and her daughter?
Honestly, ma'am, I really don't know. I'm just trying to get all of this resolved. I'm trying to, because I was at a gas station on camera minutes before they say, within probably like 15 to 20 minutes before they even said that this happened.
But even after providing the alibi of being in a gas station on the night of the murder, the police would piece the evidence together. The surveillance footage at the apartment complex, the multiple charges he was currently facing, and the testimonies that align led to the issuance of his arrest warrant. And it wasn't long until he was finally arrested. Just hours after he came forward to deny everything, at around 6 p.m., Jones was spotted by members of HPD SWAT alongside the Central Patrol Division tactical teams in a parking lot, and there, he He was arrested without any compromise and was taken into custody. Jones didn't run, he didn't fight. Not this time. With the evidence piling up against him, Jones was charged with capital murder alongside aggravated assault with a deadly weapon.
While Jeremiah Jones claims to Fox 26 he's innocent, he's got quite the rap sheet at just 22 years old.
When he's 18 years old in 2018, you've got a page worth of criminal offenses in Harris County.
The criminal justice system gave Jones break after break, but that didn't stop him from racking up new criminal charges while out on bond. He was even out on bond in Fort Bend County.
5 days ago, he pled guilty to felony theft and was sentenced to 172 days. And then I see time served.
Get this, the Fort Bend County DA's office tells us Jones served his 172 days while being in and out of the Harris County Jail and Fort Bend County Jail for bond violations. Instead of revoking his bond for felon in possession of a weapon, 338th Criminal District Court Judge Ramona Franklin just raised the bond amount higher. Jones bonded out yet again on June 1st.
He's actually out on now 3 felony bonds, because he's out on the burglary, again. He's out on the felon in possession of a weapon, a gun, again. Now he's out on another felony, evading arrest.
He tried to plead to, yet again, post bail for these charges, but the judge denied his request, meaning he would remain in custody during the trial proceedings.
Now to a developing story. The man accused of shooting and killing a 9-year-old girl last week in the Heights made his first court appearance.
22-year-old Jeremiah Jones faces a capital murder charge as well as aggravated assault. Kathy Hernandez joining us live from downtown Houston with more on what took place inside the courtroom. Kathy?
Good morning to you. Jeremiah Jones appeared before a judge at about 9:30 this morning. That's where the judge denied his bond despite requests from his attorney. 22-year-old Jones stood before the judge wearing a yellow jumpsuit. He is charged with capital murder and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. The prosecutor laid out the alarming accusations against him. He's accused of shooting his ex-girlfriend and her 9-year-old daughter, Kylie Sorrells, at their home on Oxford on June 13th. Kylie died at a hospital. Prosecutors say Jones was upset the mother had broken up with him 2 months before and had even threatened to kill her the week before.
It's a case of great community concern anytime one of our children is victimized. It's something that sort of strikes at all of our hearts in the criminal justice community. My thoughts are absolutely with the family this morning.
And at the time of the shooting, Jones was out on bond for evading arrest. He had also violated a protective order a different woman had filed against him. He also has a very extensive criminal history stemming back from when he was only 12 years old. For now, he remains behind bars without bond.
Be that as it may, the battle for justice was far from over. As of now, Jones is awaiting trial for the murder of Kylie, while Brittany and her family vied for justice.
Just a hurtful process at this time, and we're devastated.
This grieving grandmother says she plans to fight for a law to be put into place in her granddaughter's honor that would make the punishment for repeated threats carry the same weight as if they actually carried it out.
As the fight for justice happened, the news of the murder of an innocent child sent ripples of public outrage. Many questioned why Jones was allowed to post bond after bond despite facing other charges all at the same time. And this backlash only gets worse. When the public learned that judges had the authority to deny bond to repeat felony offenders, the public became more outraged by the failure of the System 1 that ultimately cost Kylie's life.
For the life of me, I cannot fathom how this continues to happen. And this is just another example of another victim of the Harris County bond pandemic. In this particular instance, a 9-year-old girl paid the ultimate price. She lost her life.
Tonight, Kylie's mother on Instagram thanking law enforcement for making the arrest. She says her daughter loved playing basketball and making TikTok videos. The arrest personal for Houston police. Kylie was also a member of the police activities.
And the courts don't have to give a bond, or they can raise it to $1 million. It doesn't matter. If you've proven you're not going to be held accountable, or you're not going to do your job as a citizen and not go out and commit crimes, you can hold them in jail. The courts keep saying, oh no, it's a constitutional right, they have to get a bail. That's not accurate. They are lying to the public.
A tragedy that could have and should have been prevented. Meanwhile, Kylie's family, especially Brittany, was left struggling to cope with an unimaginable loss. The pain of losing a child in such a tragic and preventable way weighed heavily on them, leaving behind only memories of what could have been. A GoFundMe account was created to help cover the funeral expenses and support the grieving family as they went through this devastating chapter of their lives. And to commemorate her short yet precious life, a funeral service was held at the Fountain of Praise in Houston. Kylie's death became a painful reminder of a system that had failed to protect her. Her death was an eye-opener not just to her family to remain vigilant, but it also exposed deep flaws in the justice system that allowed a repeat offender to walk free. Let us know what you think about this case in the comments section below.